we can appreciate the complexity of early African American or African culture in the diasporas if we understand that trade in West Africa and along the African seaboard all the way up to the eastern side had already commenced roughly 100 years in advance of the real stark trade in human beings that ended up creating the African diaspora in the Western Hemisphere. What I mean by that is that Africans were already speaking Creole languages because those were languages of trades. Africans were already going to Europe before the colonial rule set in, before slavery set in, because they were involved in the economic system of the world. So you have to understand that this globalization is not new. We're the first consequence of globalization. But Africans were already learning European languages prior to coming to the United States in bondage. And so many of the people who came here already spoke some form of English, whether it was a pidgin English or a language of trade or actual English or French or Spanish, because not every person white person who came to the United States spoke English. They spoke other languages. So I think we have to unpack the history a little bit more and really begin to understand some of its other dynamics. Spiritual ideology, which is Africa's cultural axis, became a double-edged sword to justify and to refute Africa's humanity. Blackness itself, with Africa as its place of origin, was ridiculed on soapboxes and in cartoons, and we saw some of that in the short clip this afternoon. Economically, one's cultural and biological relationship to Africa helped galvanize culturally diverse working-class Western Europeans. So Western Europeans could be dirt poor and have absolutely nothing, and what do they tell them? At least you're not black. You know, at least you're not black. As long as you weren't black, you were okay, right? Same stuff. We see this, you know, in various ways where people are not taking into consideration their own interests because of the discordance of association with being black. And blackness is not skin color. Don't misunderstand me. In American politics, it has nothing to do with skin color. It has everything to do with a bucket of so-called behaviors. Black people are lazy, they don't have jobs, they're not educated, they don't want to work. What else? Can I put anything else in the bucket? Can't speak English properly. Jezebel's evil, all that kind of stuff. So as long as you're not behaving like that, or if you are behaving like that, you're acting black. So the way to control the class issue is by separating out and putting into one group all the sins. It's in a Khan, they call it Edufu, right? It's the Edufu. The Edufu is the one who carries all the ills of society. So that's what happens in this context, where African Americans and African American culture becomes the Edufu. So you don't have to look at the other side. You can pretend like the other side is perfect, okay? Like most oppressed and enslaved Africans in the Americas, they sought to develop different forms of resistance against the onslaught of these negative images, the dismantling of their families, and the physical cruelty and spiritual debasement. And much of this comes through when we see Garvey's movement, and Garvey pushing, you know, wearing what people thought were flamboyant outfits. It was to regale oneself, to dress oneself in the clothing and the attire of power. And of course, he went a little overboard with it, but it had the impact, the intended impact for the people that it needed to have an impact on. This earlier phenomena is also summarized by Cabral when he says the liberation struggle must bring diverse interests into harmony, resolve these contradictions, and define common objectives by large strata in the population. So the diversity among Africa's ethnicities, the push and pull and tug among class and different associations and disassociations with one's blackness and African heritage, Cabral says must be brought together if we are to forge some type of direct action in order to restore our humanity. As trade between Africa and Europe progressed from the 15th to the 20th centuries, Africa increasingly lost her earlier parity with Europe. As Professors Nkrumah and Walter Rodney demonstrate, her diverse economy and historic markets eroded as her major export from gold, salt, and ivory moved to becoming human beings. In the 21st century, I'd like to add, we are returning to gold as a major export and have added other resources like oil, cadmium, and all these nice little cell phones and gadgets that we have. Most of that comes from the Congo, which remains in utter turmoil. 85% of, I forget the, what it's called, but coltan, yeah, thank you. 85% of that gadget there, and this one that's in my pocket that I forgot to turn on, also are coming from the Congo, which keeps the Congo destabilized, which keeps Nigeria destabilized because of her oil wealth. As Professors Nkrumah and Walvin demonstrate that under the growing demands in the Western Hemisphere for able-bodied men and women between the ages of 15 and 30, and children between the ages of 6 and 14, Africa literally exported her youth in generation after generation over a 500-year period. Now think about that. Over 500 years, somebody comes and decides to take the youth of America out of particularly the border and some of the rural areas in the United States. What do you think would happen to the United States? Begin to decline. Why? Because there's no one behind in youth to begin to regenerate the system, to come up with new ideas, to provide the workforce and so forth. And so this is what we have over a 500-year period. Africa's youth and strength was drained away to build and develop external economies in non-African nations. This youth was Africa's progeny, filled with her knowledge of herbal medicine, agricultural skills, husbandry, memory and language skills, arts and songs. Don't think that people just took a ship, went over, and whoever was standing on the port ready to be exported was who they took. They took able-bodied, healthy people who had skills. How do we know this? Because when you look at the record, if you're in Africana studies, you need to look at the primary source records. We know that in certain areas of the United States, they imported people from particular areas in West Africa because of their ability in rice production.